There was a time in America when life sparkled with excitement and dreams felt endless. The 1920s, often called the Roaring Twenties, were years filled with jazz, fancy parties, and the belief that anyone could become rich if they worked hard enough. But behind the glitter and music, there were real people, some chasing fame, some chasing love, and others building monuments to their success. One of those monuments was a mansion so large and beautiful that it looked like something from a fairy tale. Its name was Harbor Hill, but before we walk through its grand halls, we need to know the man who made it all possible, John William McKay. The McKay fortune begins. John McKay was born in Ireland in the 1800s, in a time when life was full of struggle. As a young boy, he dreamed of a better life across the ocean. When he arrived in America, things were not easy. He sold newspapers on street corners, worked in shipyards, and did whatever jobs he could to survive. But he never stopped dreaming. His big break came in the dusty mining town of Virginia City, Nevada. In 1873, something incredible happened. John McKay and his partners discovered a huge silver and gold deposit called the Big Bonanza. This wasn't just a lucky find. It was one of the richest discoveries in American history. That strike made him one of the wealthiest men alive. In today's money, his fortune would be worth around $2.5 billion. But even with all that money, John McKay faced a problem. In the eyes of the old money families, those who had inherited wealth for generations, he was still new money. They believed real social status couldn't be bought. It had to be inherited. Yet while John himself never fully broke into high society, his children would be welcomed into that glittering world. And among his children, one stood out, the man who would one day build Harbor Hill, Clarence Hungerford McKay. A marriage that made headlines. In 1897, Clarence McKay met Catherine Alexander Dwyer, known to everyone as Kitty. Unlike Clarence, Kitty came from a family with a long history and social reputation. She was even descended from English nobility, Lady Kitty Dorr of Grasmere. Their marriage was more than just love. It was a blending of two worlds. Clarence brought enormous new wealth, while Kitty brought old-world charm and class. Their wedding was the talk of the town. And as a wedding gift in 1898, Clarence's father gave them something unbelievable, a massive piece of land, 648 acres in Roslyn, Long Island. The estate sat high on a hill with breathtaking views over Hempstead Harbor. On a clear day, you could see all the way to New York City, more than 20 miles away. But this was no ordinary gift. The land was placed entirely under Kitty's name, making her the legal owner. That was a bold move for the time, and it showed just how powerful this family had become. This land would soon hold one of the grandest mansions in America. Its name, Harbor Hill. The dream takes shape. To bring their dream home to life, the McKays hired one of the most famous architects of the Gilded Age, Stanford White. He was part of the legendary firm McKim, Mead & White, which designed some of the most iconic buildings in America. White's style was all about elegance, beauty, and grandeur, and that was exactly what the McKays wanted. The entrance to Harbor Hill began with a mile-long driveway, lined with tall maple trees. At the end of this long road stood a massive limestone mansion that looked more like a European palace than an American home. Harbor Hill covered about 80,000 square feet and had 52 rooms. Construction took 3 years and cost around $781,000 at the time, roughly $27 million today. When finished, it became the 8th largest private home in the entire United States. But what made Harbor Hill truly extraordinary wasn't just its size, it was how it functioned. The McKays ran it like a royal estate. To keep it running, they employed 126 servants, cooks, cleaners, gardeners, butlers, maids, and stable workers. Every day, dozens of people worked behind the scenes to keep the mansion shining and alive. Harbor Hill wasn't just a home, it was a kingdom inside Harbor Hill. Stepping inside, Harbor Hill was like walking into another world. The first thing guests saw was a grand oak-paneled hall. Its walls glowed with polished wood and were decorated with plaster columns and a carved ceiling. A wide staircase rose upward, bright with sunlight streaming through the windows. From there, visitors entered the main hall, where the floors had a chevron pattern that seemed to lead your eyes toward the view of the harbor. A fireplace so huge it could burn an entire tree stood proudly at one end. Each room told its own story. The study overlooking the main hall had a balcony built from an old choir stall taken from a French church. The drawing room, inspired by the style of Louis XV, shimmered with white panels, gold trim, and tall mirrors that made it glow with light. The billiards room was lined with oak and centered around a massive marble fireplace. The dining room was filled with antique French furniture and intricate designs on the ceiling. The library held shelves upon shelves of books, and even an armory displayed weapons, shields, and suits of armor. Every corner of Harbor Hill spoke of power and taste. On its walls hung priceless art by legendary painters like Botticelli, Raphael, and Bellini. The mansion was not just a home, it was a museum, a palace, and a stage for luxury. A queen in her palace, Kitty McKay quickly became known as one of Long Island's most glamorous women. With her beauty, fashion, and charm, she ruled over Harbor Hill like a social queen. The mansion became famous for its grand parties. Guests arrived in horse-drawn carriages and glittering cars. They danced under chandeliers, sipped champagne, and laughed in rooms filled with gold and art. But behind the glittering walls, not everything was perfect. Trouble in paradise. While Kitty was adored by society, her marriage to Clarence began to crack. Clarence loved his wife deeply. He had given her everything, Harbor Hill, endless wealth, and a place among America's elite. But Kitty had a restless heart. Rumors spread that she had romantic affairs with other men. What began as whispers in social circles soon became public gossip. For Clarence, a man raised with strong values of honor and loyalty, this was a deep humiliation. The public attention on their private pain made life unbearable, but he stayed, trapped by duty, image, and perhaps hope that things might change. But they didn't. Their love story was fading fast. Love, betrayal, and the golden days of Harbor Hill. The grand halls of Harbor Hill were filled with laughter, music, and light. But behind those beautiful walls, the McKay family's story was slowly turning into a tragedy. For years, Clarence McKay tried to hold on to the image of a perfect marriage and a perfect home. But life inside the mansion was far from perfect. Kitty McKay, the woman who seemed to have everything, wealth, beauty, and status, was growing restless. The scandal of Kitty McKay. At first, the whispers were quiet. Just gossip passed from one servant to another. But soon, the stories became harder to ignore. Kitty was said to have a wandering heart, often seen at parties and gatherings with men who weren't her husband. In high society, secrets never stayed hidden for long. Newspapers and gossip columns began to hint at her behavior, describing her as charming and spirited. But everyone knew what those words really meant. To the outside world, Kitty McKay was dazzling, wearing diamond tiaras, leading grand balls, and smiling for every camera. But for Clarence, each public appearance was a reminder of how far apart they had grown. He had built Harbor Hill for her, poured his heart and fortune into creating the most beautiful home in America. Yet all the money and art in the world couldn't fix what was broken between them. Clarence's heartbreak. Clarence McKay was a man of quiet pride. He wasn't known for wild parties or dramatic speeches. Instead, he found peace in art, books, and the company of true friends. But living with Kitty's public betrayals broke something inside him. Still, divorce was unthinkable at the time. For people of their social standing, appearances mattered more than happiness. So he stayed, pretending everything was fine. Guests continued to visit, dinners were held, and the orchestra still played. But those who looked closely could see the sadness in his eyes. And in those years of quiet suffering, something unexpected happened. He met someone new, someone who reminded him what kindness and loyalty felt like again. Her name was Anna Case. The new love, Anna Case. Anna Case was not like anyone Clarence had ever known. She wasn't born into wealth or fame. Instead, she worked her way up from humble beginnings to become one of the most respected opera singers in America. Her voice filled theaters and concert halls, and her performances were known for their emotion and grace. When Clarence McKay met her, he saw in her something that money could never buy: sincerity. While Kitty loved attention and excitement, Anna was calm, gentle, and thoughtful. To Clarence, she represented everything his marriage had lost: Their friendship slowly grew into love, though both of them knew the world would judge them harshly. For a man still married to a socialite like Kitty, being linked to a singer could cause a scandal. But Clarence no longer cared about appearances. After years of loneliness, he had finally found peace in Anna's company. Their bond became one of quiet devotion, hidden from the flashing lights of high society, but deeply real. The glittering parties of Harbor Hill. Even as drama unfolded behind closed doors, Harbor Hill continued to shine as one of the greatest estates on Long Island's Gold Coast. The McKays hosted legendary parties where America's richest and most powerful people gathered. Presidents, foreign royals, business leaders, artists, and writers all found themselves walking through its grand halls. The lawns glowed with lanterns, orchestras played under the stars, and servants carried trays of champagne and crystal glasses. From the terraces, guests could look out across Hempstead Harbor, the water reflecting the light of hundreds of candles from the mansion's windows. People said no other estate in America could match the atmosphere of Harbor Hill's gatherings. To many, it seemed like paradise, but to Clarence it often felt like a performance, a beautiful illusion built to hide his pain. The writer who saw it all. Around this same time, a young writer named F. Scott Fitzgerald was living nearby on Long Island. He and his wife Zelda often attended the lavish parties of the Gold Coast's elite. Fitzgerald was fascinated by this world of wealth, beauty, and loneliness. Although he may never have set foot inside Harbor Hill, the estate and others like it left a deep mark on his imagination. They became the inspiration for his most famous novel, The Great Gatsby. The story of Jay Gatsby, a rich man throwing endless parties in hopes of winning back a lost love, echoed many truths about real people who lived during the 1920s. The glowing lights, the laughter, the champagne, it was all so dazzling. But beneath it all was heartbreak, emptiness, and a longing for something real. In many ways, Harbor Hill and its owners, Clarence and Kitty McKay, embodied that same story. They had everything the world could offer, except happiness. The cracks beneath the gold. By the late 1920s, the glamorous world of the Gold Coast was starting to crumble. The signs were small at first. A few businesses closing, fewer parties, guests leaving early. But soon, everything changed. In 1929, the stock market crashed, marking the end of the Roaring Twenties. Fortunes that once seemed endless vanished overnight. The laughter stopped, the music faded, and the great mansions of Long Island began to feel more like ghosts of another era. Clarence McKay, though still wealthy, wasn't prepared for what came next. He had always been generous, perhaps too generous, spending freely on his estate and lifestyle. But now, the cost of maintaining Harbor Hill, with its dozens of servants, gardens, and endless repairs, became impossible to manage. The halls that once echoed with voices and music grew silent. The grand gardens became overgrown, paint peeled, fountains dried up, and the once sparkling mansion began to show its age. For Clarence, who had lost so much emotionally already, it must have felt like watching his dreams slowly fade away. A quiet love in a quiet home. Despite his financial troubles, Clarence McKay still had one blessing: Anna Case. By 1931, his divorce from Kitty was finally complete. Later that same year, Kitty McKay died in Paris, closing the most painful chapter of his life. That same year, Clarence and Anna married. Unlike his first marriage, this one was not built on power or social image. It was built on love and peace. But by then, the golden age of Harbor Hill was over. The mansion that once stood as a symbol of wealth now felt like a burden. It was too big, too costly, and too empty. So Clarence and Anna decided to move out of the main house. They settled in a small farmhouse on the edge of the estate. A quiet, simple home far from the glittering halls they once knew. For Clarence, it was a return to something real. After years of chasing the dream of grandeur, he found comfort in simplicity. The man who once owned one of America's largest mansions now lived in a modest farmhouse. And perhaps, for the first time, he was truly content. The fall of Harbor Hill and the end of an era. The story of Harbor Hill didn't end with love or parties. Over time, the mansion that once stood as a symbol of wealth, power, and ambition began to fade. Its decline mirrored a larger shift in American society. The end of the Gilded Age and the rise of a new modern world. Clarence McKay's final years. By the late 1930s, Clarence McKay had seen almost everything life could give and take. The mansion he had built with his family, the estate that had hosted glittering parties, presidents, and royals, was now quiet and mostly empty. In 1938, Clarence McKay passed away. His death marked the final chapter of Harbor Hill as a true family home. Grief-stricken, Anna Case, his loyal wife, moved to a Manhattan townhouse, trying to leave behind the memories of the mansion. But tragedy seemed to follow. Within just 2 years, even that townhouse was lost to foreclosure. The McKay fortune, once one of the largest in America, had nearly vanished. Harbor Hill, which had stood as a monument to wealth and ambition, now stood largely abandoned. The army moves in. By the 1940s, the world was at war. America needed land and buildings to support its military. The vast grounds of Harbor Hill were perfect for new purposes. Even if the mansion itself was no longer a home, the U.S. Army leased part of the estate and turned it into the Roslyn Air Force Station. Soldiers marched and trained where once garden parties had glittered under the stars. The grand halls, filled with chandeliers and priceless art, now held military equipment. For the people of Long Island, seeing Harbor Hill taken over by the Army was shocking. The mansion, that had once symbolized wealth and beauty, now represented practicality in a changing world. The mansion crumbles. Time, neglect, and the harsh realities of the modern era took their toll on Harbor Hill. By 1947, the house had fallen into serious disrepair. Windows were broken, roofs leaked, and gardens were overgrown. Maintaining the mansion was impossible, and no one had the money or the desire to save it. The decision was made: Harbor Hill would be demolished. Workers used dynamite to tear down the walls that had once hosted presidents, artists, and royalty. In just a few days, the mansion that had taken 3 years to build and millions of dollars to furnish was reduced to rubble. By 1955, John William McKay III, Clarence's son, sold the remaining land to developers. On the 648 acres where Harbor Hill once stood, 400 suburban homes were built. Streets, driveways, and modern houses replaced the grand lawns and terraces of the McKay estate. The end of an era. The destruction of Harbor Hill was more than the loss of one mansion. It represented the decline of the Gold Coast of Long Island, a region once filled with palaces of America's wealthiest families. Across the North Shore, dozens of estates had been abandoned or torn down. These homes had been too large, too expensive, and too impractical for the modern age. The world that built them no longer existed. The roaring parties, glittering chandeliers, and army of servants disappeared. Only stories, photographs, and memories remained. For a time, the Gilded Age seemed like a distant dream. Wealth and grandeur, once celebrated, became reminders of a time that could not last. The legacy of Harbor Hill. Today, nothing of Harbor Hill remains. Where guests once strolled through terraced gardens, families now live in quiet suburban homes. The mansion itself, with its 52 rooms, priceless art, and breathtaking views, exists only in history books and old photographs. Yet Harbor Hill continues to inspire. Writers, historians, and artists remember it as one of the grandest estates in America. Its story lives on in literature, most famously in F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. The endless parties, glowing lights, and sense of both wonder and sadness in Gatsby's mansion reflected the real world of estates like Harbor Hill. The mansion's rise and fall teach a powerful lesson. Even the greatest fortunes and most beautiful homes are not permanent. Wealth can disappear, buildings can crumble, and time changes everything. Harbor Hill reminds us that ambition, beauty, and dreams are fragile, but stories of them can last forever, a symbol of ambition and loss. In the end, Harbor Hill was more than a mansion. It was a symbol of the Gilded Age, the hope, the luxury, the heartbreak, and the fleeting nature of success. Clarence McKay and Kitty McKay, Anna Case, and all who walked its halls were part of a story bigger than themselves. Like Jay Gatsby in Fitzgerald's novel, Harbor Hill represented dreams built on wealth, destroyed by reality, yet immortalized in story. Its legacy reminds us that history is not just about buildings or money. It's about the people, their choices, and the lives they lived within those walls. Even though the mansion no longer stands, Harbor Hill continues to live in memory. Its story is a cautionary tale, a piece of American history, and a source of inspiration for generations to come.